LEC is back somehow after a long hiatus. Somehow we just didn't have any LEC for the longest time. Fnatic now 1 month away from their previous series. It's as if we are playing a new tournament. The weird part about making all the predictions here that we need to acknowledge is that we have very limited volume. This is a playoffs that is starting off of the back of 4 best of 3s, and we didn't even see the teams play against each other besides KC versus MKOI and Fnatic versus G2, which was very, very limited. This is where the split is starting. So, ahead of the competition, I said that G2 and KOI have a massive advantage because they used 2 months in a very busy fashion. They went to EWC, MSI, got to scrim against good teams, while the other teams were just oinking and on vacation. And I think with how the format is as well, with the breaks and the time in between, this format is almost designed to make teams that went to MSI and EWC have a massive, massive advantage. So with that being said, let's jump into the individual matchups. MKOI versus Fnatic. The main thing for me is Fnatic is the one team that has made changes in the top 4. And the tricky thing for them is that they have a lot of things to adjust to. They also carry a lot of luggage from the previous splits in the best of 5s. And I think that if there is a world where Fnatic wants to qualify to the World Championship, I think they need to do it now. If they don't beat KOI here, imagine the lower bracket run they need to do. They need to beat GX, probably they will beat BDS, and then they will have backs against the wall, full pressure against a team that already dealt with that pressure, and then they need to play against probably the loser of G2 versus KC, which I think is too much to ask for in the current state of Fnatic. This is the time to strike. I think MKOI, in my mind, should be better. I think that the early game is very similar. I think that Fnatic's biggest strength is how they connect with AD, support, and jungle. And if they can create big enough leads through that, things are going to make sense. I think that in terms of the characteristics of both of these teams, I do think that they are quite similar. But I do think that Jojo Pune is a little bit more integrated in what, of course, KOI want to make happen. I do think that as the game progresses in the mid to late game as well, KOI should be better. So Fnatic need to find really big leads in the early game to actually win, and that is through bottom side. But that is a tricky thing to do, because I do think that MKOI and Fnatic are the 2 best early game teams in the region. So with that being said, I do think that the fireworks are going to happen in the early stages. I think this is a series that can easily go to 5. I am leaning KOI though 55-45 for this matchup. I think that KOI just is a little bit more complete as a team, and I think that the weakness of Mirwin and Oscarinin will not be exposed in this series, because I think both of them will be the weakness against the likes of Broken Blade and Kana in later matchups. But there, I think the top lane is going to be less relevant, and I do think I could even go so far that Mirwin would find advantages over, of course, Oscarinin. I think Oscarinin as a player is just so damn disconnected from the game. They're just playing 1-4. Like Oscarinin is playing like he's Zeus, but he's not Zeus. Zeus is also very isolated in the game, but he gets advantages in lane phases, and he understands how to farm side. Then he just shows up with 2-3 items and is a beast. With that, it just never happens with Oscarinin. I think he's far too disconnected from the team identity. And I think that beyond Rumble, I'm not really getting super excited about the champions he plays. Maybe Kisanta. And this is something that I think that MKOI can challenge. So I think MKOI is going to win this one. G2 versus KC. KC right now, I think, a challenge that all teams with rookies and rookies face is how do they deal with off time? I think that it's important to highlight that KC, Vladi, and the boys kept themselves very busy in the previous season, in the off season, and then of course they had first stand and all of winter, which was very healthy for them. I think that when you are early in your career, you should just push yourself to the limit to understand your limits, because regaining form after losing form is an art. It is very difficult to do so, and some players might find peaks but don't understand how to find those peaks again. And KC is kind of in this transition period where they, in my opinion, in spring, went a little bit too far to try to correct some of the problems they have in terms of the flaws in draft that they faced in like game 5s and 4s at the internationals. And I think in that process, they also lost what they were strong at and good at. the recipe of having carries on top, and then of course tanks and support and jungle. And then the meta shifted, which forced, different kind of flavor to things. Maybe CC mid laners like Galio, Annie. These are champions that Vladi is very bad on. I think that he should be playing like mages and of course the Yone. And I think that KC could tighten up and be one of the best teams in this playoffs, because I do think individually, in terms of what they've showcased so far this year, in terms of their peak individually, I do think that KC can be the most dangerous. But I just think that in terms of their early games and their inconsistencies, they're kind of hoping a lot of these games to be bailed out in the fights that happen later on in the game. And I think that's a dangerous proposition to be in. I think that similar to how Fnatic and MKOI are the two strongest early game teams, I also think that G2 and KC are the two weaker early game teams. And with that being said, G2's weakness in early game and KC's early game weakness won't matter as much, and the main focus will be the mid to late game. And I think that G2 is just a lot sharper there. I think how G2 play around Caps has gotten a lot better, and I think that how KC play around Vladi has gotten so much worse. I feel like in the current state of things as well, I do think that Skumond is just performing way better than Yike. I think Yike is looking a little bit too similar to how he did in G2, where when the health of the team isn't the greatest, he tries to do, like he plays well up until the point where he makes a mistake and then kind of loses the traction and the idea in the game, which is tough. But mechanically, this team is very dangerous, and I think with good prep work, they can beat G2. But G2 tend to do very, very good in the first series of playoffs, and I think this is, one of G2's biggest strengths, just a prep work and understanding with less information and less data. I think KC is a team that can scale into playoffs, and I can definitely see a world where KC do the lower bracket run. But I think at this point in time, I do think that G2 should beat KC. Like a 3-1, I think G2 could beat them. I think G2 is just in good form. But I repeat, we might have poison data. If I tell you, G2 had a perfect split, guys. They didn't drop a single map, a single game. It sounds exciting. But then I tell you, they played SK, BDS, Team Heretics, and Fnatic. Like that's not hype at all, they didn't play against all of the competitors because the format, of course, didn't give us any data or any information. So we'll see. But from based on what we see so far, and based on what I mentioned in terms of the overall growth that you can get from the international and how much breaks you get, that the breaks aren't only important for you to rest, but you need time to digest what you've been through. Experience only becomes experience if you are capable of using it to either improve your methodology or actually pull from it when time matters. If you just went through it and you're exhausted and you move on to the next thing and you're scrambling, that experience doesn't really latch on in the same way. And I think G2 has now, landed in a way where they could digest the international super easy. In past or other regions even this year, you see that the LPL, you see a couple of teams that were struggling, Bilibili and of course Anyone's Legend. Obviously Bilibili replaced their jungler, but you could see that, they didn't hit the ground running because it takes a lot of effort to rest up and also digest it and at the same time play, because the format is a lot more rushed. But in the context of this, G2 and Koi are piss chilling. So I think G2 and Koi are my favorites on the top side. In terms of the lower bracket, GX, I think, should smoke BDS. I think the issue for BDS is that I think the engines of this team, Paros and Bukada, are too inexperienced, and it shows in the way they drive the game. Their game plans are way too shallow and limited in terms of how they approach games. It's like, oh, let's get eyes to a couple of items and then scale. I think if there's any entry here at all for BDS, it is Nuke versus Jackies. I haven't been super impressed with Jackies. I've been disappointed with Jackies ever since his arrival to the league. I have higher expectations from him. And I think if BDS is going to win this time around, I think it's going to be because Nuke has a performance like at a level that we've never seen before. But GX have better team play, better early game, better cohesions, better game ideas. I think props to GX for incorporating Isma at what I would say, is Isma's like best performances. There was always like something there in terms of the early games he created, but he kind of lost his mind. But I do think that Isma is having, the best split of his career here in the LEC on GX, which I think is cool. I do think that GX should be able to beat BDS. I think GX is just below the line of the top 4, and I think they are a solidified 5. And I think the opportunity for GX here is that Jackie still has a lot more room to play better. I think he can be great. If he can figure that out again, that's going to be massive. And also, they are feeling the pressure early on. If they win one series here and they play against the loser here, then obviously they already come from a perspective of momentum, and also they're already used to the pressure of being under the gun, which I think is super important. And if Jackie steps up, I do think that GX is a team that could play spoiler in a scenario where some of the other teams don't make it through, because even though we have a solidified top 4, they are flawed. All 4 teams are flawed in some way. So there is definitely, opportunity there. We continue. Team Heretics versus Vitality. I think the main thing is Team Heretics, I think, in terms of... I've said this so many times. If we merge Team Heretics and Vitality, we would have a really good team. A really good and competitive teams. Team Heretics versus Vitality is basically Shio and Stand versus basically the solo laners and the ADC of the enemy. I think the biggest issue for Team Heretics and the biggest disappointment always is in terms of how they build their past rosters. They always pair together these carries that have zero firepower and don't really offer anything to the game. It doesn't matter how good your support and jungle is, because in the end, like, you just don't have anything to offer in terms of firepower. I think a player like Fnatic would work really, really good if his support had a mid laner that he could really elevate. Like, Fnatic worked together with Caps because support could just leave and Fnatic could just do his thing, and he's a very, very good, stable, player in isolation. There's been cases with Fnatic carries on Draven and Aphelios. I don't want to limit him to just that, but I do think that a world where Shio and Stand had better carries on their team, especially like in mid lane, that's the big one. I do think that this team could do a lot better. But just look at the history of Team Heretics. They had Ruby, Evi, they had a combination of Wunder and Zviru, Wunder and Perks. It's like the pairings here are just a little bit too strange. Like these previous Team Heretics rosters, it's like where is the guy who can grab the ball and dribble a little bit, if you know what I mean, It's just that you just have a bunch of veterans, too many intangibles. You need to have some tangibles as well, Nevertheless, I think the Vitality individually should be... I think in terms of what Vitality is, I do think that they are inconsistent in how they do their preparationary work, and I think they are flawed in their approach to draft in a lot of cases. I do think that individually they should just be good enough to beat Team Heretics. So I do think that this is a series that can easily just go to 5 games, but Vitality win out in the end. I think Naknako is much better than Carlson. I think Chaik is much better. The main angle for Team Heretics is just Shio and Stand. I think in terms of team identity, team cohesion, I think the Team Heretics has done a much better job than Vitality of cementing that. While I see Vitality just be too much all over the place, whether it's playing like tank top or like picking Yasuo as a counter, like silly things like this, I think that Vitality is just a little bit too all over the place, and they need to be a little bit more humble in their approach, I feel like. So Vitality 3-2. GX BDS, I wouldn't be surprised if this is just 3-0 GX, by the way. I have very little faith in BDS. I think GX 3-0 here. I think G2 KC, 3-1 G2, and then MKOI Fnatic 3-2 MKOI. So that is it. We're going to have these matches this weekend, which is cool. I think, if I remember correctly, we have 4 days of LEC. And obviously, we're going to review and cover those games. I'm not going to live stream them because I don't have co-streaming rights. I'll catch you guys, of course, on the next one. As per usual, all the best to you. Take care of yourselves, and arrivederci. Bye-bye.